have something on the film up there?
Yeah, we're gonna use the screen.
That should go just fix it.
This hasn't pulled down the wall. The 6 foot pulled down, puts it down.
You get a lot of money if you go fix it. That's where it goes.
Yes, yes, you should be able to sit the other side.
That's what I heard.
Now you're gonna have a stiff neck for the next half of it.
I'm gonna raise your eye out here.
I'll be standing, we'll stand.
Okay, so it's gonna be
Yes, I'm standing by
recorded
the
from
podium.
back camera,
We're standing by the
so
podium, right?
that's why we're doing the Van White side of it, and then when we want to speak or talk, go up there.
That's a good thing to do. Your garden?
No. You can go down there and look.
I will. At your house or the community garden?
Right out here, you fix all the plants.
Oh, I think I like that. I haven't seen it.
Yeah. That's my last big job.
Oh, don't say that,
how
Humber.
No, I mean that.
Okay.
The corporate area. That's it.
No, your last project is your repent. We talked
Right.
about that.
Now, you shouldn't have said that when I married my sister.
We talked about that.
You
when
know, I had
at
my
your
sister,
80th birthday
you know, my
party.
sister, I had a funeral yesterday for my sister, you said that?
Your long pond
Okay,
area.
that didn't feel so
Which
good.
what?
Where's your long pond area?
I have a
Oh,
lot, I have a
Your
lot.
long pond area. Did she pass, or was that a,
She died in the
call your reltive garden? Oh.
He's gonna show
We're using the screen
all
here,
the
so
Where at? Community center?
we better view.
some A's out of these.
Ocala, and at one time they wanted to do state teaching. And I got, that's right, had a fit inside.
Yeah, so what about in Wilson?
It's on the northeast section, like when you head down Wilson, there's a road that cuts over 121.
All right, somebody didn't sign in, I got eight names, we got 10 people here.
Oh, I'm sorry, I am so sorry, my brain's just not here.
Oh,
She had 32
11, 3 people.
Somebody was
I put in the eighties, the woman about who the, I think it was 40 years old.
Well,
That team did a one, he was already hard to look at, he was only like the 80s. He looked like he was 39 years old.
Okay, who needs this?
2 people need it. There's one.
Where?
I didn't realize she had 5 children ready to bring her.
Where'd she live? Oh, well,
So there is,
yes, sir.
this 32, I'm assuming, for now.
Just to share with that the format. This is very informal. It's one of several workshops we'll have regarding the subject. I apologize, no, we have tables or chairs if you like a round table. And we can try to avoid that the next one for ease, but we are live. There are people through the cameras, so one camera's working. So the only thing I'll ask is if everybody's going to talk, I'll put Mr. Coombs down a light and pass the microphone, so it's recorded.
That's all recorded, we got you, okay.
And this is introducing for those that don't know, Mr. Scott Coombs, the Executive Director of Washington Florida Regional Planning Council, and has a team of several master planners that help us in our partnership with them as we look at our comp plans or amended
Yes, 40 cities and 12 counties,
Yeah.
52
So
jurisdictions.
the clearinghouse committee has a robust schedule every month with the council meeting, presenting amendments and complimenting amendments. So again, open forum workshop, no actions by any commission body tonight. It's more just introduction into what our intent is as we look at this subject. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As the mayor said, I'm Scott Coons. I have the honor and privilege of serving as the Executive Director for the North Central Florida Regional Planning Council. We are an association of local governments formed in 1969. The city has been a member for over 50 years. And our board is made up of elected county commissioners and city commissioners, and your current representative is Mayor Hope. And Mayor Hope is serving as our chair this year of the council and doing a very good job. So a couple things about the council, then we'll jump into the community workshop for the city. We're involved in 5 different subject areas. We have a strategic regional policy plan to guide the future growth of our 12-county region. We staff the North Central Florida Local Emergency Planning Committee and work in public safety with fire rescue, first responders, emergency managers, and provide them training each year for hazardous material incidents. We are an economic development district, a designation by the U.S. Department of Commerce. We have an economic strategy for the region to diversify the economic base across our 12 counties. We have a robust program in local government services in providing community planning services to 5 counties and 15 cities, 20 of those jurisdictions across our region, as well as working for several of them on the Community Block Grant Program for neighborhood improvements, infrastructure, downtown redevelopment, economic development, and housing rehabilitation. And our final area is transportation. We serve as the official planning agency for the state-funded Transportation Disadvantage Program, which provides paratransit services to elderly, disabled, and low-income individuals for life-sustaining activities. Here in Alachua County, MV Transit provides that service. You probably see their van around the county and the community, and the majority of those trips are for either medical appointments or for grocery shopping. So with that, we'll move on into the topic for this evening. As the mayor said, this is intended to be an informal workshop. I have quite a bit of material to review and get through, but if you have questions as we're going along, please don't hesitate to ask them at any particular time. So we're going to talk a little bit about what is planning, why do we do it, overview your comprehensive plan, the future land use map, a little information on some recent traffic counts in the community, review the future land use map and the amendment process, a little bit about what is zoning and your land development code, review of the zoning map and the land development code and zoning map amendment process, and focus a little bit more in depth on industrial uses. I know that's been a topic of interest here in the community over the past year, and then a brief summary. So what is planning? Planning is simply an organized way of shaping how a community grows and develops. And it's basically a 4-step process. First one is, where are we currently? What are the current conditions? We look at data analysis and current trends. Where do we want to go in the future? That is the comprehensive plan that contains goals, objectives, and policies. How do we get there? That's implemented through the land development code, zoning, subdivision regulations. And then we look back, how did we do? That's every 7 years. The community is required to do an evaluation of the comprehensive plan and update it to meet new state requirements. So why do we plan? For several reasons. Hopefully to accomplish compact, orderly growth and the efficient use of infrastructure, public resources, water and sewer and transportation, and have the efficient use of very limited financial resources for most communities these days. To provide protection for the environment and our natural resources. And last but not least, you're required to do it by state law. The Chapter 163 Florida Statute Community Planning Act requires every city and county in the state of Florida, all 468 of them, to have a comprehensive plan to guide their growth and development. So a little more about the plan. It's a blueprint for how growth and development will occur in the community. It's the overarching policy document that governs growth and development in the city. Sets principles, guidelines, and standards. establishes land use categories for the city, and is comprised of chapters which are referred to as elements. Each of those elements contains at least one goal, several objectives, and multiple policies. Goals are desired future outcomes for the community. Objectives are measurable activities to be accomplished, and policies are steps how we will accomplish those objectives. So I mentioned the elements. The comprehensive plan itself consists of several chapters: future land use element, transportation, housing, and then sanitary sewer, solid waste, drainage, potable water, and aquifer recharge, commonly referred to as either public facilities or the infrastructure element. Conservation of natural resources, recreation and open space, intergovernmental coordination, capital improvements, now a 10-year schedule of planned projects, a public school facilities element to coordinate capacity of schools with the school board and each of the municipalities in the county. And more recently, about 4 or 5 years ago now, each comprehensive plan has a required property rights element requiring cities and counties to consider private property rights whenever they make land use or zoning decisions. So the future land use map designates the general distribution location of future uses in the city, and over here on the wall is behind Mr. Arnold is the future land use map for the city. Comprehensive planning is the way the city decides how land will be utilized both for today and the future. That's the future land use map, and it includes several land use districts or categories. One is rural agriculture of Alachua County, because you've annexed some lands and still has Alachua County land use designation, which is 1 dwelling unit per 5 acres. The city has an agricultural future land use category, which is also 1 dwelling unit per 5 acres. Your residential land use is 1 to 4 dwelling units. Actually, it's probably 1 to 3, because with central water, you can have up to 3 dwelling units per acre. To have 4 dwelling units per acre, you have to have a central sewer system, which I know you've been discussing and planning for, and accumulating resources, hopefully be able to implement phase 1 in not too distant future. Commercial, and that has a floor area ratio of 0.75, and I'll talk a little bit more about what a floor area ratio is. Light industrial, which is 0.5 floor area ratio, industrial, 0.5 floor area ratio, and conservation. So currently in that future land use map, of those categories, 7% is at Alachua County rural residential agriculture. 63% of the land is agricultural. So 70%, over 2/3 of the future land use designations on your current map is agricultural designation. That's largely the annexed areas to the east and west of the city. 18% is residential, 9% is commercial. You do not have any light industrial designated. Heavy industrial is 3%, or 183 total acres, and no conservation lands are designated. Those are usually publicly owned natural resource preservation sites for a total of over 6,000 acres in the city. As I mentioned, the industrial uses, the teal highlight, let's see here if I can highlight that, are the industrial classifications, the area here around the Maddox Foundry, area over here around the trucking facility, and then this large area to the northeast, which is undeveloped forest and pasture land, which is all designated industrial. Of that heavy industrial category, of the 183 acres, only 22 are currently developed at the present time, or about 12% of the heavy industrial areas are currently developed for industrial use. Most of it is vacant. A little bit about traffic. There's a very direct relationship between land use and traffic. You can't use or access or develop land unless you have a coordinated and integrated road system. You have 2 state roads that come through the city, as you're all well aware of. State Road 24, Archer Road, US 41, known as also State Road 45 designation, is North and South University Avenue. The most recent Department of Transportation counts from 2023 on the segment of State Road 24 from the east limits to the intersection with 41 is average daily trips of 13,000 at a level of service D, and that is the adopted level of service in your comprehensive plan for State Road 24. State Road 24 to the west has 9,000 trips, or level of service C. US 41 north has over 4,700 trips, also level service C. And then US 41 to the south has 5,200 trips, also level service C.
Sir,
Yes, great.
just a quick question. What triggers the drop from level D to level E? Do you know off the top of your head?
It depends. It depends on the classification, whether it is an urban segment, whether it's a transitioning suburban segment, whether it's a rural segment, whether it's 2 lanes, whether it's 4 lanes, whether it has left turn lanes, how many traffic lights there are. There's a whole system of level service that the Department of Transportation has developed, so it varies. Right. But I can get you some more information on that if you're interested. Yeah.
Yeah, my curiosity is what will trigger the current configuration of State Road 24 to go from D to E?
Well,
Assuming there is an E.
right. Immediately east of the city on State Road 24, from the city limits east to Parker Road, 122nd Street, that's currently operating at level service E. The segment east from Parker Road to 91st Street, just east of Tower Road, is failing and operating level service F at the present time. As you well know, those who drive to and from Gainesville on a daily basis. I mentioned that floor area ratio. That's how you measure the intensity and limit the intensity of non-residential development, commercial and industrial. It's a measurement of the building area size in relation to the lot. It is a simple division of dividing the total area of the building. By the numerator and the denominator is the lot area. As I said, for industrial, it's 0.5. If you had an acre of land and you had a single-story industrial building, it'd be approximately 21 or 22,000 square feet would be permissible. But you can also have multiple stories as long as it doesn't exceed the height limit in the land development code. So it's to calculate the bulk or mass of the building, to limit intensity and lessen environmental impacts, and control the mass and scale of development. The higher floor area ratio, the greater building volume, either on ground coverage or multiple stories. Impervious surface is a measurement of the impervious surface on a particular lot. Includes the building, parking, any hard surface that doesn't allow for percolation of rainwater into the ground. So the comprehensive plan is not a static document. The future land use map is not static. It can be amended to add, delete, or modify the text, the goals, objectives, and policies in the document. Also, the future land use map can be amended from time to time to change land use on a particular property. There's 2 classifications of amending the future land use map. It's called small scale and large scale. Small scale is 50 acres or less on an individual lot. Text changes directly related to adopting concurrence with a small scale is also a small scale amendment, and there is no state review on something of less than 50-acre amendment. It's entirely a local matter between the Planning and Zoning Board and the City Commission making the final decision. Planning and Zoning Board, serving as local planning agency, holds a public hearing. They make a recommendation to the City Commission whether to approve or deny. City Commission has 2 readings of an ordinance, the second being a advertised public hearing for adoption. Large scale then is anything greater than 50 acres, or any text amendment to the comprehensive plan is considered a regular amendment as well. That's a little different process. Local planning agency holds a public hearing and makes a recommendation to the City Commission. Then the Commission holds what's called a first public hearing or transmittal public hearing, takes public comments, and takes into consideration the Planning and Zoning Board's recommendation and decides whether or not to transmit the proposed either 50-acre map amendment or text amendment to the comprehensive plan document to the state land planning agency, which is the Florida Department of Commerce, and other state and regional reviewing agencies. And they're required to do that within 10 working days of that hearing. Large-scale expedited review process. There's 2 processes when it goes to state. Expedited process are most regular amendments. Reviewing agencies have 30 days to provide comments back to the local government. Then the city has 6 months or 180 days to review those comments, hold a second public hearing, and either adopt as proposed, adopt as amended, or deny the amendment, and that 120 days can be extended if additional time is requested of the state land planning agency. Then a second public hearing is held, which is the adoption hearing. And again, they adopt it either as proposed, either amend it or deny. If they adopt it and there's no formal appeal, then it becomes effective within 31 days. If an affected party or state agency does not appeal, then it becomes effective 31 days later. So what is zoning? How's that different from the comprehensive plan and land use? Zoning is a process for designating specific districts. There are more zoning districts than there are land use categories concerning the use of land, the activities allowed, the placement, spacing, setback requirements for yards, height, bulk, and density of development. The primary goal of the zoning code is to avoid and minimize disruptive land use patterns with incompatible land uses. It's the primary implementing tool for the comprehensive plan. It said it regulates the density, how many dwelling units per acre, or intensity, that floor area ratio. Also, as a process for subdividing land, it regulates platting process for preliminary plat, construction plans, and then a final plat approval, and establishes a zoning district within each of the future land use categories. Zoning districts must be consistent with the future land use map. The comprehensive plan and the future land use map are like the Constitution. They're the controlling document. The zoning and land development code implement the comprehensive plan and future land use map and must be consistent. So we'll talk about the districts here in a minute. Also under the land development code is a site and development plan process to review specific commercial or industrial or multifamily development. If it complies with the code, then the zoning administrator will issue a zoning permit. It's also a conditional use. This is a use that's not permitted by right in each district, but if the number and locations are controlled on a case-by-case basis, could promote the public health, safety, and welfare, which are the constitutional authority under the 10th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution that gives cities and counties the legal authority to regulate the use of land. So a petition is filed for conditional use, must identify the specific use that's being requested and the grounds for why it's being requested, must demonstrate that it will be in harmony with the general intent and purpose of the code and will not have an adverse impact on the neighborhood or surrounding properties. Conditional use will be granted by the city unless it's found to not comply with the land development code, propose a danger to public health and safety, pose substantial adverse impacts to adjoining properties, be substantially out of character with the neighborhood, or inconsistent in conflict with the comprehensive plan. Another permit of the land development code is a variance. If there are special conditions on a particular piece of property due to its configuration, the dimensions of the site, or environmental conditions, that the literal enforcement of the code is not possible and would create an undue hardship, in order primarily to address the building envelope and required setbacks, then a variance can be requested for such a situation. Variances will not be authorized by the City Commission if it finds the literal interpretation of the code would deprive the applicant of rights commonly enjoyed by other property owners, that the variance granted is the minimum variance necessary in order to make a reasonable use of the property, and again, that variance will not be adverse impact on detrimental to public welfare. So that is the zoning map, and there's also a copy of this up here on the wall, and I'm going to be leaving both those maps here for the commission and the community to review. So as I mentioned, the zoning districts must be consistent with the comprehensive plan. And so you have just a one-to-one relationship with the agricultural land use. Residential, there's an R1, R2, and R3, and those are based on different lot sizes within that residential future land use category. As well as commercial, there's a C1 commercial district and a C2 commercial district. In industrial, there's a light industrial and a heavy industrial, and historic overlay, which currently does not exist in the city, but there is the opportunity to designate a historic overlay if the community desires. So the amendment process for the Land Development Code or MAPS is similar to the Comprehensive Plan. A Land Development Code text amendment may be proposed by the City Commission, Planning and Zoning Board, or Zoning Administrator. A zoning map amendment may also be proposed by those three entities or the owner of the property to be rezoned or their agent. So you cannot come in and file an application to rezone your neighbor's property without your neighbor's consent. So Planning and Zoning Board, again, holds a public hearing on the proposed amendment and makes a recommendation to the City Commission. City Commission holds 2 readings of the ordinance. Only 1 public hearing is required at the 2nd reading, and there is no state review on any zoning review or conditional use permit, site plan, or variance, or conditional use under the Land Development Code. That's entirely a local matter of the community to implement the comprehensive plan. There's only state review on those large-scale comprehensive plan map amendments over 50 acres or to the text of the document. So let's talk a little bit more about the 2 industrial zones you do have. Industrial light warehousing. There are currently none of these on the map. All the industrial property is zoned heavy industrial. But under light industrial, you can have fabricating and assembling of products in a fully enclosed building. Only fabricating and assembling within a completely enclosed building, or warehouse for storage or distribution. And there are no uses permitted by conditional use in the light industrial district. So the light industrial district is fairly limited in its scope of activities. The heavy industrial has the same first 2, fabricating, assembling in a completely enclosed building, and warehousing. In addition, it permits cold storage facility, and the other activities permitted in the heavy industrial is manufacturing, assembling, compounding, processing, or treatment. So you can process raw materials into a usable product for mass production operations conducted in a fully enclosed building. In addition, you can have manufacturing, assembling, compounding, processing, and treatment of mass production operations outside of a fully enclosed building. So that's the primary distinction between the light industrial and heavy industrial. Light industrial has to be in a completely enclosed building, and heavy industrial can be in a building or outside of a building. So in summary, we've reviewed the comprehensive plan and the elements of the comprehensive plan and the future land use map, a little bit about the current traffic counts in the community, reviewed the land development code, processes and procedures, described the industrial uses for light industrial and heavy industrial. And that concludes the overview and presentation. And at this time, we're happy to take any other questions or open up for comments or concerns about issues that you currently see in the community, and any suggestions or strategies that you might think would be appropriate. Yes, sir.
When was the last comprehensive amendment done?
2021, the comprehensive amendment. Yeah, there have been amendments since, but the evaluation was 4 years ago. So the next evaluation will be up in 27, I believe.
What prompted the current comp plan review?
This evening, this process, we were asked to come conduct a few workshops related to the conversation the community was having this past year about industrial uses and how to address those going forward.
So, we can, so right now, you can only separate your property one time.
Correct. Lot split, yes.
But we can change that, right?
You can do a lot split without going. You can divide a lot into 2 parcels without going through the subdivision process. If you divide property into 3 or more lots, then you have to go through the formal subdivision process of preliminary plats, construction plans, and a final plat. Yes.
Right, I
Yes.
understand
Okay,
that.
all right.
But what I want to know is if we can change that to maybe split it, put what size, because we want more density and more homes here, and we have 5 acres inside the city limits. And I know some people had already split off their home, and then, for example, one person split off an acre, and now there's 4 acres left. I mean, could we change that you could split them into 1 acre lots or whatever without going through subdivision plan? Because doing a subdivision plan is very expensive, and unless it's a builder, but if somebody just wanted to say even cut that in half for another person just to build and not necessarily build a subdivision, does the commission and stuff, we have that opportunity to change that? Because as a Realtor, I see a lot of areas that could happen, not necessarily putting a subdivision in, but reasoning why, and maybe the reasoning could come to the commission and they could approve, disapprove.
Yeah, there are a couple options there. If property is on an existing street or road and there's no new street involved, you could set up a minor subdivision process and go directly to a final plat without having to do a preliminary plat and construction plans, because there would be no constructions, no new roads or drainage or stormwater. If the parcel completely fronts and all the lots would be fronting an existing street. Yeah. And you have maybe 4 or 5 of those lots divided under what's called a minor subdivision process, which is expedited and just goes right to a final plat.
So how much is a minor subdivision? I mean, a regular subdivision is very expensive, and somebody, say this person had 5 acres, they cut down an acre for their home, now they have 4 acres,
Right.
they wanna sell it,
Right,
but 2 family members wanna build a home,
Right.
and it's on a corner lot.
right.
So they could probably put 3 of their family members there and divide it up 3 times, with it being all on a main road. How much would a minor subdivision be? Would it even be feasible for them to do something like that? See, I'm trying to get
Right.
the density here without people having to pay an arm and a leg for a simple, cut my property in half or thirds.
Right, well, again, the simple lot split is a simple lot split.
Right.
Anything beyond that, even a minor subdivision, would require a survey and a final plat. But the commission could set up a process for 3, 4, 5, some reasonable number of lots on an existing street to be subdivided, but not go through the whole process of preliminary plat, construction plans, final plat, go directly to final plat, again, because there'd be no new street, no new improvements.
Yeah, and I agree, they would all
Right.
definitely need, they have to have a survey, because that's a lot, and there has to be a legal description to that lot.
Right. Yeah, there's 2 reasons we have subdivision regulations and platting. In the 17th and 18th century, when land was being divided and sold, the primary reason at that time for platting was so everyone knew who was buying what and what was being sold to who, and being properly recorded in county clerk's office. So that's land sales benefits from having a platting process. The second reason is the improvements to be made in terms of streets and drainage and stormwater. So it's sure we have orderly subdividing of land and proper recording, so we have reasonable sales and people know what they're buying and selling. And then secondly, so we have adequate public facilities for that development as it occurs for streets and drainage. Yes, sir. Well, we can take a look at that if the city wants us to.
Okay, so just one point for clarification. So we're not discussing redoing the comprehensive plan at this time, or that's for the future. Okay, just want to be clear about that. Okay, and just for this gentleman, one of the reasons I asked for this was because the current ordinances were done before the comprehensive plan was created. It's supposed to be the other way around. And so that was one of my concerns, because I saw a mismatch between the comprehensive plan and current zoning. So that's one of the reasons I asked for it. Okay, some of my concerns. So as you see that we have these big and heavy industrial areas, we have these big and heavy industrial areas, and I would like to see mixed use. I don't see a reason why some of these areas are all zoned for heavy industry. They could easily be parceled out more to provide commercial or light industry, with some sort of oversight with that, but I think that would make much more sense than what we currently have now. I just don't see Archer as being a new, Hackensack, New Jersey. Just don't see that. I'd also like to see hearings for subdivision plats and for industrial use. So after it goes through the process, right now it simply goes to the zoning administrator. The zoning administrator is the only one who sees that. Doesn't go before the city commission, doesn't go before the public. And as you can see, especially with traffic, we have lots of issues. So the public should be able to hear, you know, how that is all shaking out. So I'd like to see that. In regards to this, yeah. I'm sorry, site plans, I should say, site plans, yeah, yeah. Exactly, so this is after so whether it goes through a CUP and comes back approved, or whether the site planning, there's no hearing on that. The other thing is that in regard to CUPs, currently, there's no path from the planning commission to the city. So it's a whole. If you read the ordinance and you start looking at how things are supposed to go as part of that process, everything that happens in the CUP hearing for the planning commission has to be completely redone by the city commission. None of that testimony is admissible as it's currently set up. So the city has to redo the whole thing all over again. So it's not like they can review the record and just look at where the issues are at. So that makes no sense. And it just requires, for a lot, like I think the last one we had on heavy industry was, I don't know, 7 hours long for each one, maybe? So it's kind of crazy. The other thing I would like to see is that there's no requirement for developers to provide any substantiation for economic claims. So a developer will make claim, we're going to hire X amount of people, it's going to bring X amount of revenue, whatever they might say. So it's all puffery. And what I would like to see is something more substantive. So something that is more substantive and less subjective. So I guess a better way is, as opposed to substantive, objective evidence of economic claims. Thank you.
A couple things. Following up on your question first about subdividing and lot splitting, something that's coming down the road. The state legislature this year, the House and Senate both passed accessory dwelling unit legislation that would require every city and county to permit accessory dwelling units in single-family districts by right. There was some variation between the two versions. They ran out of time during the regular session, but we anticipate that coming back next year and probably becoming law next year. So that would provide opportunities for additional smaller affordable units in single-family areas. That's something the state's going to preempt and tell you that you have to do that. Couple things on your comments. Yes, ma'am. I was going to make a few follow-up on a couple of comments. Let's see. Couple things. The conditional use permit process being repeated at the Planning and Zoning Board and City Commission. That's basically a legal requirement that both those proceedings have to be quasi-judicial proceedings based on substantial competent evidence. And the City Commission serves as the final deciding body based on new testimony before them, not the testimony before the Planning and Zoning Board. That's for them to make their recommendation. So they just can't look at the record and say, all this was provided, 2 weeks ago. We're just going to read the summary of it and decide what to do. The applicant, as well as other individuals, have the opportunity to provide testimony before the final deciding body. So it can be cumbersome sometimes, particularly if it's an involved issue. But that's the process. On the issue of substantiating economic impacts or commitments from rezoning or future land use map amendments, those statements hold no meaning or are non-binding. An individual can stand before Planning and Zoning Board and the City Commission at this podium and say, you rezone this property commercial, I'm going to provide 100 jobs and everything's going to be wonderful. Tomorrow it gets approved. Tomorrow you could turn around, contact a realtor and sell that property to someone else, and whatever is permitted by right in that zoning district, either that owner or a new owner could undertake and come in and get a permit for. So it's contract zoning is illegal. You can't say, we'll zone your property if you only do this with it. What you're permitting is this an appropriate location for commercial? And all the uses that are permitted in that commercial zoning district, regardless of what the individual, either prospective owner or current owner has plans for, those plans could change depending on economic conditions and other factors. But those statements are non-binding And what the commission and the planning and zoning board need to consider is that location appropriate for all the uses, not what this individual saying they're gonna do, but all the uses in that land use category, in that zoning district for commercial or industrial or one of the residential zones. Again, that's the process. It's, yeah, it's a legislative process. It's not a contractual process.
Okay, so then is it appropriate for, so I just want to make sure I understand. So I was referring to conditional use permits.
Okay.
That particular process. And as you know, part of that process is, so, and I understand the whole thing about zoning, it's a little bit different. So conditional use permit, where there has to be a special exception. And as you know, there's those 5 or 6 categories that have to be considered in the comprehensive plan. Could the economic piece be a part of that? If you can have these other categories, why can't you have something about the economic
Right.
and the substantiation of it?
Conditional use permits are different.
Right, that's why I was.
Right, they're not legislative, they're quasi-judicial, and they're for a specific use for a particular piece of property at this location. And additional conditions and safeguards can be placed on that activity, could be hours of operation, multiple conditions that are reasonable can be placed on conditional uses. So that can be conditioned for that particular use. But again, to guarantee economic impact, no one can do that. They can sign a statement, but it doesn't mean it's going to happen.
Just to bring it home, an example of this is we've had some dialogue and discussion with Woodard and Curran regarding phase 1 Archer wastewater capacity with the current wastewater. I've spoken to both Woodard and Curran and current mayor, Mr. Marlowe, regarding are they or are they not able to take our capacity. He spoke about what Scott was just talking about. They have to forecast all of these development projects that are coming forward. But at any time legally, that developer can say this is 12 months away and then take 2 years, 3 years to develop that. Every time that's come forward to the city of Newberry, they have to earmark that capacity for the wastewater, for the water. So it's overinflated because the projects take 2, 3, 5 years out. But when they state we're at 90%, that's with everything that's on the books. But Mr. Marlowe said that right now they're at 40 to 60% capacity with the current system, and Archer is in that phase 1. And the way our timeline is, in 18 to 24 months to be able to have that pipeline go, that's why they can take that capacity now. But if you look at their plans through zoning and CUPs and all in the development, they're at 90%. This is why they're moving forward with the 5-year wastewater expansion project, because if everything comes to fruition, they will be at 90%, and we'll need that 5-year expansion plant and system in place. You know, everything is right on schedule. But that clarified for me the accountability the city of Newberry has to have for infrastructure, wastewater, water, versus the reality of when those developments are actually going to occur. Even with Archer's first phase 1, because if you remember, a year and a half ago, phase 1 was going to be under construction starting in January of 2025, and now it's earmarked, shovel ready for January of 26. Perfect world with 12 to 18 months for completion. So,
Yeah. So again, so I understand that. Just to be clear, we're talking about conditional use permit, non-conforming use, where the planning commission and the city commission ultimately is required to make a decision to make an exception, essentially, for a non-conforming use. And so, again, the question I'm asking is whether or not there can be a requirement in the ordinance for economic data as presented to be objective. A requirement for objective data from the developer, if the developer chooses to provide economic data, that be objective. That's the question. whether how I'm not saying how you legislate, how the commission makes that decision, but at least it's objective data that they're making the decision on, like everything else.
Clarification, a conditional use permit is not a non-conforming use. A non-conforming use is a pre-existing use that doesn't conform to the current land use and zoning. So a non-conforming use would be an old store from 50 years ago in an area that's now zoned residential. That non-conforming use can continue to operate as a store. That store can be sold to someone else, continue to be operated as a store. The store can actually be changed to a similar use with similar impacts and continue to operate. If that use ceases for a specified period of time, usually like 6 months or a year or so, then what is reestablished on that property would have to conform to the regulations. But conditional use permits are not non-conforming. Sometimes some communities are called special exceptions, which is sort of a misnomer. It's a conditional use that's appropriate in that district if the number of them and the location are approved by the city. But they are conforming uses and they're legal uses, not non-conforming uses. Again, then back to your comment on the economic data, it's
It's not bound by law.
It-
They do their subdivision development and their timeline and how many homes.
that's binding reservations for proposed development they approved, anticipate coming online in the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years.
But they're not bound by the timeline.
Right.
Again, if the burden of proof is on the developer, as you meet those, currently in the ordinance, there's I think there's 5 or 6
Right.
things. So if the burden of proof is on a developer to prove those things, in which case the city is then must approve it.
Correct.
So I'm asking if an additional criteria to put in there, is that any economic data that's presented by the developer be objective. It's the only thing I'm asking for.
To be required.
Problematic at best, because what you're asking for is then the commission to make a decision on some future event which may or may not occur. The 5 or 6 things that are in the code are current conditions and doesn't meet those requirements. If it does, then it has to be approved. But the condition of approval on something that may or may not occur in the future is be purely speculative.
Okay. Well, I don't
Yeah,
want to labor it.
okay, all right, yeah.
But then-
It's an interesting thought, it's a concept,
Yeah,
right?
it's a concern.
Right.
If you're making that decision, and
Right.
somebody's saying, well, I'm gonna do X, I wanna build a nuclear power plant tomorrow.
Right.
And if I build a nuclear power plant, it's going to bring $20 million
Right.
into the city. Well,
Right.
that is a meaningful statement, but if it's all just smoke and mirrors, then you're making a decision based upon smoke and mirrors. Understanding that there is some, subjectivity for what's happening in the future, but you can make the same argument when we talk about traffic.
This happened
But-
in Archer, if you all remember the campground. That-
That many times.
And that went through the whole process of approval and presentation on multiple meetings, and now there's a for sale sign on it.
Yep.
And the impact to the neighbors and presenting, legalities and, the plans, but the plan was never presented that if X, Y, Z doesn't happen, I'm gonna sell it. I mean, that was never required, that was never presented. And yet, there's a for sale sign on it. And so we're not gonna have a KOA campground at this point, that we went through that whole process. So, don't know why, I'm just using that as an example, but how many months did we go through with that presenter and then the residences, surrounding property owners, et cetera? So,
Right. And once that conditional use permit is approved, that's the only thing that can occur on that piece of property, either by that particular owner or subsequent owner, because the approval goes with the land. That's the only thing that can occur on that property. Typically, when conditional use permits are issued, there's a time period put on it, either 12 months or so. If a valid building permit has not been pulled to construct that use, then the approval is null and void. And if they decide they want to do it 2 years later, they got to come back and get a new approval, because conditions may have changed in the surrounding area. Pardon?
We've never done that, because we approved 2, the KOA on the 20-acre South Archer. When we brought them into the city, he said he was having a KOA. Then we approved, on the 6 acres where it's the low spot, where that used to be a trailer park, and he was gonna do tiny homes. We approved that because of all of his BS.
He's on that timeline.
You know, so it's happened twice. So there's a couple things that actually our planning and zoning needs to be trained in, and is this Mr.
Mr. Coons?
That is, could he be part of the training? Sorry, and then I got another question, sorry.
Yes, we do training for planning and zoning boards, explaining the whole process and their duties and responsibilities. Yeah, that's kind of the second half of that presentation I gave tonight.
One of your questions, comments and opinions, Mr. Little.
Yes.
Yeah, we can do that if asked.
My question is, our attorney, okay, all the cities have special places where they have, where it's zoned manufactured homes. Okay, I'm a real estate broker in Alachua, Marion, Levy County. And this is what I observe. All the small towns, all the towns, sorry. There's different areas. But in Archer, our attorney said that that's against the law, that they can go in the R2, you know, just the single family residence. I just want to know if that is true, because that's been almost 3 years ago and they never brought anything forth, and it was approved for a mobile home to be in an R2.
That is true. Under state law, manufactured homes, not single-wide mobile homes, but manufactured homes with a 312 pitched roof, an eave, siding similar to site-built homes, anchored, skirted by state law, must be permitted in single-family zones as similar to site-built home, but it has to meet those standards.
It has to be, it can't be
Not a single-wide trailer, a manufactured home that has the appearance of a site-built home with a pitched roof. Yeah,
Rating codes from
right. Yeah,
after 1970.
right. Yeah, that's been state law for decades.
Then why does every city have area zoned?
For mobile.
Sorry, yeah, every city has it. What? Why? Yes, yes. Oh no, not for single wides, for manufactured homes. Period. No, but they have a zoning for it. Like, if you want a manufactured home, then you need to go, just like R1, R2, or commercial versus R1. You know, this would be a zone for mobile homes, whether it be single wide or double wide. They have areas for that. Do you happen to know why?
Again, because single-wide mobile homes are not permitted in single-family districts. Only site-built homes and manufactured homes that meet standards, certain standards. Okay.
So another thing I was wondering about, other places I've lived, there is an additional step prior to the CUP, where it's a public hearing, and it's not a decision-making. What happens is, if the developer gets up, the developer presents his or her development, whether it's industrial, residential, and then the public gets to make recommendations in terms of conditions. And then the developer can say yes or no. And there's no debate. The developer says, yes, I will do that, that's a good idea, whatever it might be. And then once they do that, that gets added to the conditions for the CUP hearing. So my observation is that generally has resolved a lot of issues prior to the CUP hearing, because the developer has exposed it, the community can provide input, and then if the developer says yes, it gets locked into the CUP hearing, and that becomes part of that decision process.
That is a relatively recent trend in some communities. referred to as either a community or neighborhood meeting. That is not a public meeting. That's a meeting conducted by either a developer or a landowner to explain their concept to the neighborhood, as you say, and then hear comments, and they may want to make adjustments before they formally submit their application to the city for the formal public hearing process. Some communities do that. But it's an informal meeting conducted by the landowner or developer, and they're not bound by any of the comments, recommendations, but if they want to get their project approved, they probably ought to consider some of them.
So that's something that would be put in the ordinance?
Yes, that could be amended to the land development code to require that of certain types of development.
That would trigger an amendment for.
Well, it could be for comprehensive plan amendment, could be for rezoning, could be for conditional use permit. Yeah. Other comments, concerns, issues, suggestions? Yes.
What is the process on, well, first of all, I'm not totally sure what you were contracted for, meaning it was a complete comp plan and it was $5,000. I don't know the numbers or the dollars, but I am curious because the city, if you're not aware, is out of money. So we have to be very diligent with what we spend our money on. And I don't know if, I think I heard 5,000, 7,500. If that's the entire, and that's soup to nuts, that does the whole thing. Because I know this young lady was talking about, can you come and train our people? That's probably not free, is it?
It's part of the services contract, yes.
It's built in to come, okay, wonderful. Well, if that's something that is thrown in, then by all means. I don't know what that service contract includes, but again, $7,500. What is that everything, or is there going to be another, I don't want to say a hidden charge, but that gets you started and then it's another 10 grand as you get toward the end for whatever. And then with that said, what is the process you're starting today? And this has been very nice and very informative. Now, the next step is X, and then it's Y, and how long does that take?
Point of clarification, our annual service contract is $7,000. It's a fixed fee agreement to assist the city in complying with the State Community Planning Act under Chapter 163. That involves processing comprehensive plan amendments, rezonings, conditional use permits, variances, and that is basically a back office operation. We work with city staff to build their capacity so they become more familiar with the process. But we review the applications for completeness, we verify the legal description, we prepare and submit the public notices for all the hearings, we draft the planning and zoning board resolutions and city commission ordinances subject to city attorney review for legal form and sufficiency. We prepare a concurrency management assessment to identify the impacts on infrastructure as well as environmental site conditions. We maintain the city's future land use map, geographic information, parcel-based map, the existing zoning map, also parcel-based. And every 7 years, conduct the evaluation and prepare any required amendments to the comprehensive plan, all for $7,000 a year. It's a fixed fee agreement. There's no hidden costs. There's no extra costs.
Understood.
Now, over time, one caveat is if a particular community has a lot more activity than average communities this size, then we may come back and adjust that in future years. But currently, it's $7,000 a year.
With that said,
Yeah.
does that mean that we've done this every year for the last 10 years and we paid
Right.
this group $7,000?
Correct.
Or we just started that this year and paid them $7,000?
Every year we've been a member
it's-
of the North Central Florida.
Okay, so that's budgeted and we just pay them $7,000 and have for the last
And
10
ensure
years?
we have those services available to us and make sure that we're, by state statute, compliant with the 7-year review minimum requirements. But every time somebody zones in and volunteer annexation, then that map has to be changed. It has to be notified to North Central Florida Planning Council as our agent to make sure that those maps are compliant, the zoning categories are there. The last time, and again, Scott, you'll have to correct me, but in 2019, we had an exercise of a complete rezoning review of all our categories and ensuring, and again, I'm getting old, but we had a at-length conversation about how many animals on agriculture. You all remember that? Somebody help me if that was, I believe that was 2021 when we did that. And how many roosters versus hens you could have. I mean, there were categories of schedules that were reviewed, and there was discussion and change through public input to come to a determination. And then there were the hearings and all the legality of which this service coordinates that and sets that up through our contracted legal services.
I didn't know if
And-
just now hiring him, and that was.
No, sir.
Had no clue that it was
We've-
7,000 every year, and we've done
Yeah.
it for the last 10 years.
I mean, I've lived here since the 1990s, and we've had that partnership every year with our previous city manager. Here was 23 years. And it was reviewed and renewed through the budget process, whether we were going to continue, and yes, it was checkmarked to continue. What we haven't done, and I'm blaming myself as well, just like the discovery tonight when we had Mr. Lewandowski saying, we need more training or whatever. We discover these services that are available and provided by North Central Florida Planning Council at their contracted scope of service within that $7,000. Something came up, if you all remember, a few months back, I think 6 months, I think it was in 2024, third quarter, discussing getting an outside planner group to present and offer something in a scope of service. It costs us $135,000, and these folks are doing it within their annual contract, $7,000. So not saying this is the Amazon Walmart special group here, but we get a lot for our buck through North Central Florida Planning Council. I'm not trying to promote that tonight, but not because I'm a chair of his organization, but I do feel that the system is a lot.
Yeah, it's an exceedingly exceptional value.
I see.
That's easy, exceptional value.
And it can, every year in our organization, me representing Archer in this organization, there are subcommittees that review the municipal charge for a small municipality like us at 7,000. There are other municipalities, because of the scope and size and the services that they've added, they get charged more than our $7,000. It's not like, I guess Newberry is an example. Newberry does not pay the base $7,000, do they not? They pay something higher, if I remember what we reviewed and looked at.
They now are playing for it.
And then they spin off, like Amesville doesn't have any membership of this organization where they utilize the services because they created their own department internally. And I'm sure pay a lot more than $7,000 a year. Yes.
I just wanted to say, I retired in 2012, but even before that, we used this service, and the city of Archer could not have afforded to do all of the things that this group does. It was no way possible, so we appreciated everything that you were able to do in order to make our plans efficient. So $7,000 compared to what it would cost to get our independent planner for this, that's nothing.
Makes it all the way back there or not?
I would just,
This being live streamed, it's folks.
Visioning process
Viewing
that
this.
we went through 2 years ago.
It's being
All
broadcast.
of these go through that 7,000.
I would just say, having watched this process play out in several communities in North Florida, that if there's a focus on what you do want to see in Archer versus what you don't, and incentivize the things that Archer needs and Archer wants for the future, I think sometimes that's a much more positive outcome with the land development regulations and comp plan than if you're trying to exclude things from a community, just in terms of trying to incentivize what you do want.
Yeah, so I want to follow up on that. So I agree with that, and that's one of the reasons why we'd really like to see mixed use instead of, exclusively heavy industry. Because right now, with all that area we have zoned, it's only heavy industry, and a lot of things I hear people say they would like to see here are actually excluded. You can't even do a conditional use permit for it, and we ought to really rethink that process.
What are some of those things?
Well, for example, if you wanted, in some of the heavy industry areas, you couldn't put retail shops. And will be an example off the top of my, I have to go back and look at the table.
You have lots of commercial areas.
That's true, but you also have, in the middle of town here, a exclusive heavy industry zone. It shouldn't have to be exclusive heavy industry zone in the middle of town. Now, Mr. Arnold's the company's the owner of it, so he can speak whether or not he'd like to see that. That's up to him to make that discussion. But, you know, I would like to see a more, less exclusive zoning for some of these areas. In terms of, you know, it's currently zoned heavy industry. Of course, you know, another example is constitutionally, you have to have a church. You have to allow a church to be in heavy industry zone. So if you can allow a church to be in heavy industry zone, because you have to, it's constitutional, then why can't you have a retail shop? Why can't you have a bar if you wanted to? Or a coffee shop or something along those lines, assuming it's done in some logical way.
Scott, let me ask the question.
Yes.
This is previous owner, you referred to it as the Maddox property, it's now the R.E. Arnold property. But if any of that acreage on that parcel that's all industrial were to have a vision of being something else, isn't that process required to be able to identify what that plan is from the owner, if it was myself? I.e., multiple home designation, multiple residencies, 2, 3, 4 stories, just like what Gainesville does downtown, when they take something that was the Firestone building and turn it into 4-story multi-purpose, you know, commercial, and then living above that. There's a process that owner goes through, correct? To change that zoning designation?
Yes, the short answer. 2 things. I refer to the U.S. Constitution, the 10th Amendment, to protect and promote the public health, safety, and welfare, shorthand known as police powers, reserved unto the states and delegated to city and counties. That's the authority they have to regulate the use of land and under reasonable conditions. Under the 5th Amendment of the United States Constitution, government, federal, state, or local, cannot take private property without due process and compensation. If restrictions on property renders it unusable for any reasonable use, an owner can sue the city and collect damages. Under state law, we have something called the Burt-Harris Act. Federal law on the Constitution and case law from the U.S. Supreme Court for over a century is, as long as there is a reasonable use of the property, there is no taking of the property. Right. The public is not taking the property for public use to build a park or a road. They have not restricted the owner's use. They may have limited what can be done on that property, but there is some reasonable use remaining. There's no compensation, no taking. Under state law, we now have something called the Burt-Harris Private Property Act, that if a city or county downzones property and the property owner contends that that has diminished the value of the property, not eliminate any reasonable use of it, but diminish the value, they have a right to file action against, in this case, the city, receive compensation and legal fees if they are successful. So just to change someone's property and downzone it to something less intense comes with it a lot of consequences.
Okay, so I'm not saying
Okay.
downzoning.
Right. But if, to add additional uses,
I'm saying
right,
adding additional
that's a different kettle of fish. Right,
So that's what I'm advocating for.
right, okay.
And that process
Right.
is initiated by the owner.
It sometimes, generally, most of the time it is, but it could also be initiated by the city. Right. But with the guidance that you're not unduly restricted the use of the property and subject yourself to possible Burt-Harris claim for diminution of value. Right. If you're going to add uses, that would tend to enhance the value of the property.
Right, so essentially
Right.
what I'm saying is, you know, in, like, so, you know, one of the industrial areas, you say, okay, you can have these uses that are heavy industrial. In addition to that, you can have these additional uses in that area. I don't see how that restricts anything. That actually adds more value to the property, and now the property can be used for multiple purposes. I wouldn't advocate putting residents there, but I would advocate having light industrial uses available as well as commercial uses available on that piece of property. And that adds more value to it, as far as I'm concerned, but that's me.
The city can provide the opportunity, set the table, lay a foundation for that to occur by adding a mixed-use zoning district
Right.
to the land development code. But,
What we did with the zoning with the agriculture and the chickens and all that.
right, in order to rezone property mixed use, you need to have a specific master plan or development plan for that property. And that is initiated by the property owner. So you can provide the opportunity, but the city's not gonna say you have to have mixed use and you have to have 20% commercial and 10% industrial and 15% recreation and 65% residential. The code would specify what his percentages need to be, the range of them, but it'd be up to the property owner to propose a specific preliminary development plan and then final plan for a particular mixed-use development.
So you're saying that we're, as of right now, we're stuck with heavy industry areas as they're currently built?
Today you are, yes.
That was my.
All right, okay, all right, yeah. Oops. Follow up your question about what's next steps. We'll go back and summarize these ideas and proposals and present those to the city commission and see which ones of those they want to pursue. And then we'll draft language and then go through the formal amendment process, either if it takes comprehensive plan amendment or land development code amendment. And that, depending how extensive they are, that could be a 6-12 month process.
And that's the comp plan amendment
Right.
process, so every time
Right.
this exercise is discussed, there's a trigger comp plan.
While reviewing the residential elements of the LDRs and comp plan, I would recommend Archer take a look at what Alachua County did with their cottage ordinance that allows double density by right in R1 districts. They've got to put some restrictions on the size of those properties, but it does allow relatively inexpensive units to be constructed in a more dense fashion than typical R1 designations. It's fairly restrictive, but it's probably been the most flexible and impactful for affordable housing in Alachua County in a long time.
Didn't they just add something to that in the?
There was a bill
State
with
law,
the
bill on
mother-in-law
that.
suites.
Mother-in-law suite.
What was that called?
Well, it said, that, again, the state legislature next year is probably going to require you to do that. Right. But you can get started now.
In other words, I can take my,
Property and put
say,
mother-in-law
my
suites on
property
there.
and I can make like, little cottages or something on there.
One, an accessory unit, one accessory unit. And it typically would be, the size would be limited to 50% of the size of the primary unit. There'd be other restrictions on it, but yes.
This example, the other bill out there was the religious institutions wanting to put
Right.
zoning categories on their property. That failed, and that failed in this, it'll come back next year, but I am not picking the religious organization, but the Catholic organization has lots of property on every, usually, institution they have, and so they're wanting to be very creative and put multi-use affordable housing on the tax exempt religious institution property. It failed this session, but it'll come back next year. Which is very unique and different.
So any other ideas you want to get on the list that we're going to present to the city commission?
Sorry, I have a question about the mother-in-law suite. So before, you could have put like a mobile home if it was for a disabled child or disabled parents or something. And then I think that evolved into something else, but I'm not sure what that was. So does it have to be now still for a family member?
No.
Or so?
The proposal is it would not be.
It would not be, so you could just have, if you wanted to have another smaller rental on your property, you could have it as long as it was, met the criteria, half the size, blah, blah, blah.
And one of the issues in the 11th hour was the short-term rental issues. Airbnb, Vrbo, corporations buying single-family homes and turning them into party houses is happening all over the country and in the state of Florida. So the amendment that the House put on the bill was that an accessory dwelling unit could not be rented for less than a 30-day period. And the Senate did not agree to it, and that's why it didn't pass.
Somebody asked me a question here I want to ask you. So one of the citizens sent me a text message, and they wanted me to ask this question about the historical overlay and how it affects zoning.
An historic overlay would have no direct effect on zoning, on the use of land. The uses would still all be permitted under the zoning district. The historic overlay would typically put on additional requirements or standards for altering historic structures to meet certain criteria. But the uses would be permissible as they are today, right? So it doesn't change the zoning. Just adds kind of another layer of criteria conditions for altering certain units.
That's currently happening in downtown Gainesville, Main Street. It's identified as a historic district, backs up behind the Episcopal Church, but it's still zoned what it is for that owner to do what they want. And the demolition of those buildings.
The church, yeah, Episcopal Church, they own that whole block. Yeah, they want to raise those buildings for parking lot.
Yeah, so we may want to, there is a provision in our current ordinance in terms of the, having a review by the historical board, which doesn't exist prior to development in the historical zone, which I'm not sure if that exists or not. So that, I think that's something,
We don't have,
we don't have it, no, but it's in the code.
we do, but
Yeah.
we're not identified as historic district.
Yeah. So that might be something to put on the list to take a look at that. And I just think that we just need to, if you could, take a look at in particular, the conditional use process, and make sure that we clean it up, you know, that we cross the Ts and dot the Is, so that when we go through that process, it's actually done right. In particular, like, you know, we talked about, you know, time limits on conditional use permits, et cetera, et cetera. We should make sure all those things are in our code.
Cross-reference our ordinances.
Correct.
To match that change. that may happen.
Correct.
Right.
Yes.
Do you all work with High Springs?
We do.
I saw something where they put out on central bidding, I believe it is, that they were looking to have their comprehensive plan bid out and done by somebody else. Is that, you know anything about that?
We work with the city and provide them assistance in processing amendments, rezonings at the present time.
I just
Yeah,
thought
yeah.
it was interesting that they
Yeah.
chose to do that rather
Yeah.
than to go with your services.
Right.
And then my next question is, it seems like most all of these cities would be pretty much one size fits all with the comprehensive plan for the most part. And I don't know if what you see when you represent 40 cities and 12 counties, kind of, they're mainly a cookie cutter type. And I know there's probably some tweaks, but isn't that really mostly when you go to revise these or update these? And a gentleman brought up a good point about the cottages. We're seeing more of that. And of course, the ADUs now are going to be kind of a new thing. But to rework this, are you just going off of what maybe you did in Hawthorne or, I don't know, Micanopy?
There are certainly similarities. I found through my life experience and career that geographic differences are not that significant in terms of rural communities and urban communities. Fairly universal principles and values. And yeah, a lot of it is similar, but each individual community has one or two particular issues or concerns that they want to focus on. So there are some variabilities, yes. But the basic underlying foundation, and we always, first step is look at best practices, what other similar communities have done or are doing to address a particular issue.
And just, again, being appointed Representative Archer, in my roles with the North Central Florida Planning Council, when I was on the subcommittee of the clearinghouse, all of those amendments, plan draft amendments come before that subcommittee of the North Central Florida Planning Council called the clearinghouse. There have been times in the tenure when I was on that subcommittee, when it was reviewed by the clearinghouse, presented by his master planners, that subcommittee member would make a big enough concern or issue about one of the elements that was being presented, that it would have to go back to the municipality for review and then come back. That's true, Scott, correct? I mean, I remember a couple examples of that.
Advisory comments.
By advisory, not by authority. And that's the uniqueness of this, that whether, you know, Scott, in this organization, you feel is just cookie cutter, not meaning that in a derogative sense, but they are an advisory organization that will bring back recommendations, just like what we're doing here. They're not going to give any authority to the commission. They're going to give reports and then advice for us to decide to do it or not do it, or carry it to the next level.
Yeah. I like to say, we're not the planning and zoning police. Some people think we are, because we're a regional association. We're supposed to tell cities and counties how to develop and what they can and can't do. Not correct. That's not our role. As the mayor just said, we are facilitators and advisors and provide recommendations and help communities achieve their vision and their goals and their objectives. And that may differ from community to community. I think we've probably exhausted the ideas. Any others? Last call?
Scott, just for our timeline, when do you think the next second workshop may be? I know after the compilation of the summary presentations to the commission, that would be 3 or 4 months, and now we have the second workshop.
Probably yes. Yeah, in that time frame. Yeah.
So that's our timeline.
Thank you all for coming out tonight. Thanks for your comments and questions, and look forward to continuing to work this process.
Certainly you have Scott's direct contact, but I'm available as your conduit up here. If at any time you bring something to my attention, I'm certainly, until I'm not appointed to be representing March, I'll be glad to take it to Scott and get answers for, and we'll have him reach out to you.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you again.